The sleek glass and steel tower of Jensen Enterprises dominated the skyline of downtown Chicago, its 52 stories housing one of America's fastest-growing tech companies. On the 48th floor, Bryce Harrington strode purposefully through the marketing department, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the polished marble floors. At 34, Bryce was the youngest VP of marketing in the company's history, a fact he mentioned in virtually every conversation. His tailored Brooks Brothers suit and meticulously styled hair projected the image of success he had carefully cultivated since graduating from Wharton 6 years ago. "Megan!" he barked at his assistant without breaking stride. "Is the McKinley presentation ready? They'll be here in 40 minutes. Megan Chen, a recent Northwestern graduate, nodded quickly. "Yes, Mr. Harrington. The conference room is set up and the presentation is loaded on both the main system and as a backup on your laptop. Coffee? Fresh pot of Blue Mountain, just how you like it. The breakfast spread? Assortment from Magnolia Bakery, arranged by the catering staff 10 minutes ago." Bryce nodded curtly, the closest thing to approval Megan had received in the 3 months she'd worked for him. "And the quarterly reports." Megan hesitated for a split second too long. "They're being finalized now. The data team promised them by 8:30. Bryce stopped abruptly, causing a junior copywriter to nearly collide with him. "It's 8:17. The McKinley team will be here at 9 sharp. That gives us exactly no time for me to review the numbers before the presentation." His voice remained level, but the cold fury in it made Megan flinch. "I've been following up every 15 minutes, she explained. "They said there was an unexpected discrepancy in the... I don't care if they found a portal to another dimension in the data." Bryce cut her off. "I needed those reports yesterday. This is completely unacceptable." He ran a hand through his perfect hair, a rare display of agitation. "Get Kevin from Data on the phone. Now." As Megan scrambled to make the call, Bryce continued toward the conference room to inspect the setup personally. The floor was bustling with Monday morning activity. Marketing associates huddled over laptops, graphic designers comparing mock-ups, account managers on calls with clients. Every employee he passed straightened slightly, their conversations dropping to whispers until he was safely out of earshot. The McKinley meeting was crucial. The retail giant was considering moving their entire digital marketing operation to Jensen Enterprises, a contract worth upwards of $50 million annually. CEO Thomas Jensen himself had tapped Bryce to handle the presentation, a vote of confidence that Bryce interpreted as recognition of his inevitable rise to the C-suite. The conference room was immaculate, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a stunning view of Lake Michigan, a gleaming mahogany table surrounded by ergonomic chairs, and a state-of-the-art projection system. Bryce inspected the breakfast spread, adjusting the position of a plate of croissants by approximately 2 inches. His inspection was interrupted by a strange odor. Bryce wrinkled his nose, trying to identify the source of the smell. Something musty, like old clothes or unwashed bodies. Turning around, he spotted a janitor in the corner of the room, emptying trash cans into a large rolling bin. The man appeared to be in his 60s, with graying hair beneath a worn Chicago Cubs cap. His blue uniform was clean but faded from countless washes, and he moved with the unhurried rhythm of someone who had been doing the same job for decades. He nodded politely at Bryce before returning to his task. "Excuse me," Bryce said sharply. "What are you doing in here?" The janitor looked up, mild surprise on his weathered face. "Just emptying the trash, sir. Morning rounds." "Not now," Bryce said through gritted teeth. "We have a major client arriving in less than an hour. This room needs to be perfect." "Almost done," the man replied calmly, continuing his work. "Just this last bin." Bryce stepped closer, and the smell intensified. His face contorted in disgust. "My God, is that smell coming from you?" The janitor paused, a look of confusion crossing his face. "Excuse me." "The smell," Bryce enunciated as if speaking to a child. "It's like body odor or something. It's completely inappropriate for a professional environment, especially before a major client meeting. A flush crept up the older man's neck, but his voice remained even. I showered this morning, sir. Might be the cleaning chemicals. Whatever it is, it's unacceptable. Bryce glanced at the janitor's ID badge, which hung from a lanyard around his neck. What's your name? Tom, the man answered simply. Well, Tom, I'm going to need you to leave immediately, and I'll be speaking with facilities management about this incident. Tom nodded slowly. I understand. I'll finish up later. No, Bryce said, his patience evaporating. This isn't about timing. This is about basic hygiene standards. How long have you worked here? A while now. Well, clearly no one has bothered to explain proper workplace etiquette to you. This is a professional environment. Personal hygiene isn't optional, it's mandatory. By now, several employees had paused outside the glass walls of the conference room, pretending not to watch the confrontation unfolding inside. Megan approached hesitantly, holding a folder of what were presumably the delayed quarterly reports. Mr. Harrington, I have the... Bryce held up a hand to silence her, his focus still on the janitor. I don't have time for this. I want you out of this room now, and frankly, you're fired. I don't care what cleaning service the company contracted. This level of unprofessionalism is grounds for immediate termination. Tom's eyebrows rose slightly. You're firing me. On what authority? I'm the Vice President of Marketing for Jensen Enterprises, Bryce declared, his voice rising. I oversee a team of 65 people and a budget of $120 million. If you think I don't have the authority to have a janitor removed from the premises for disrupting a $50 million client presentation, you're sorely mistaken. Tom seemed to consider this for a moment. Then, to Bryce's astonishment, he chuckled softly. That's quite a speech. This isn't a joke, Bryce snapped, his face reddening. Get out now, or I'll call security to escort you out. Bryce! Came a new voice from the doorway. A word, please. Bryce turned to see Charlotte Hayes, the company's chief operating officer, standing in the entrance. Her expression was unreadable, but the tension in her posture suggested she was not pleased. Charlotte, I'm handling a situation here, Bryce replied, irritation evident in his tone. This janitor... Now, Bryce, Charlotte interrupted, her voice leaving no room for argument. She turned to the janitor. I apologize for the interruption, Tom. None. To Bryce's confusion, Tom smiled warmly at Charlotte. No problem at all, Charlie. We're just having a chat about workplace standards. Charlotte's lips twitched, suppressing what might have been a smile or a grimace. Indeed. Bryce, my office. Now. Bewildered but recognizing an order from a superior, Bryce followed Charlotte out of the conference room, throwing a final glare at the janitor over his shoulder. The hallway had become suspiciously busy, with employees finding sudden reasons to pass by, their expressions carefully neutral but eyes avid with curiosity. Charlotte led Bryce to her corner office and closed the door behind them. She didn't immediately speak but walked to her desk, straightening a pen that lay beside her keyboard. Charlotte, I apologize for the scene, but that janitor was completely out of line, Bryce began, eager to explain his position. He was affecting the preparation for the McKinley meeting, and quite frankly, his personal hygiene. That janitor, Charlotte cut him off, her voice icy, is Thomas Jensen, the founder and CEO of this company. Bryce felt the blood drain from his face. His mind raced to process what he'd just heard, struggling to reconcile the disheveled man in the blue uniform with the legendary tech entrepreneur whose biography he'd read 3 times. That's not possible, he stammered. I've met Thomas Jensen at the holiday party last year. You met his cousin, Timothy Jensen, who sometimes attends events when Tom wants to avoid the spotlight. Charlotte corrected him. Tom prefers to observe the company operations directly, without the artificial behavior that occurs when employees know the CEO is present. Bryce sank into a chair, his legs suddenly unsteady. But his badge just said, Tom. Yes, he doesn't use his full name or title on these rounds. It defeats the purpose. Charlotte's expression softened slightly at Bryce's obvious distress. Tom has been doing this for years. It's how he stays connected to what's really happening in the company, beyond the sanitized reports and presentations that reach the executive floor. The smell, Bryce muttered, more to himself than to Charlotte. He was likely in the server room earlier this morning. There was a cooling system malfunction overnight, and he was helping the IT team diagnose the issue. Those rooms can get quite musty when the temperature regulation fails. Charlotte looked directly at Bryce. Not that it would matter if he did have body odor. We don't fire people for how they smell, especially not without a private, dignified conversation about the issue. Bryce felt physically ill. His career, which just minutes ago had seemed destined for meteoric rise, now appeared to be over. Charlotte, I had no idea. Please, you have to believe me. If I had known, that's precisely the problem, Charlotte interrupted. Your behavior shouldn't change based on someone's title. The way you speak to a janitor should be the same way you speak to a CEO, with respect and basic human decency. Before Bryce could respond, there was a soft knock at the door. It opened to reveal Tom, or rather Thomas Jensen, still in his janitor's uniform, but now standing with the natural authority of someone used to commanding rooms much larger and more important than this office. "Charlie, I need to borrow your new friend for a few minutes," he said, his Midwestern accent more pronounced than Bryce had initially noticed. "The McKinley team just called. They're running 15 minutes early." Charlotte nodded. "Of course, Tom." She turned to Bryce. "We'll continue this discussion after the meeting." Bryce stood on unsteady legs, feeling like a condemned man granted a temporary stay of execution. He followed Thomas Jensen out of Charlotte's office, acutely aware of the stares from his colleagues. Jensen led him not toward the conference room, but to a small, private office near the executive suite, a space Bryce had always assumed was used for storage. Jensen unlocked the door with a key from his pocket, revealing a simply furnished office with a desk, computer, and several family photos. He gestured for Bryce to take a seat, while he settled into the chair behind the desk. "So," Jensen began, removing his Cubs cap and running a hand through his grey hair, "you think I stink and should be fired." Bryce opened his mouth but found no words coming out. After several excruciating seconds, he managed to speak. "Mr. Jensen, I cannot begin to express how deeply I regret my behavior. It was completely unprofessional and inexcusable." Jensen studied him, his blue eyes sharp and assessing despite his casual posture. "Interesting choice of words. Unprofessional suggests you would have behaved differently in a professional context, but from where I stand, all contexts are professional when you're at work." "That's not what I meant," Bryce said quickly. "I was stressed about the McKinley presentation, and I took it out on you. It was wrong, regardless of your position." Jensen leaned back in his chair. "Let me tell you why I started doing these walkarounds 20 years ago, Bryce. I founded this company in my garage in Naperville with 2 friends from the University of Illinois. For the first 5 years, I knew every employee by name. I knew their spouses, their kids, their favorite lunch spots. But as we grew, that became impossible." He picked up a framed photo from his desk, a much younger version of himself standing in front of a modest house, arm in arm with a smiling woman. "My late wife Eleanor suggested the janitor routine after I complained about feeling disconnected from the day-to-day reality of my own company. No one notices the cleaning staff," she said, "but they see everything." She was right. When I'm Tom the janitor, I learn more in a day than I do in a month of executive meetings. Jensen set down the photo and fixed Bryce with a penetrating stare. "What I've learned about you this morning is troubling. Not just how you treated me, but the way you spoke to your assistant, the junior copywriter you nearly bowled over, and the obvious fear your team has of you." Bryce felt sweat beading on his forehead. "Mr. Jensen, I'm dedicated to driving results. Sometimes that requires being firm. Being a leader isn't about being feared, son. It's about inspiring people to bring their best selves to work." Jensen stood up and walked to a small closet in the corner of the office. He opened it to reveal several suits hanging neatly inside. "Now, I need to change for this McKinley meeting. I suggest you use these few minutes to think about whether your approach to leadership aligns with the values of my company." As Jensen selected a suit and disappeared into an adjoining bathroom, Bryce sat frozen in the chair, his mind racing. Was he about to be fired? Would he be demoted? Should he offer his resignation before being asked for it? The carefully constructed narrative of his career, Wharton wunderkind to marketing superstar to future CEO, was crumbling before his eyes. Jensen emerged 5 minutes later transformed, the faded uniform replaced by an impeccably tailored navy suit, his hair neatly combed, and his posture now radiating the quiet confidence of a man who had built a billion-dollar enterprise from nothing. "The McKinley team will be waiting," he said, adjusting his cufflinks. "I'll handle the presentation. You'll attend but not speak unless directly addressed by me. Understood?" "Yes, sir," Bryce managed, rising from his chair. "And Bryce?" "Yes?" "After the meeting, I want you in my actual office, 49th floor, east corner. We'll discuss your future at Jensen Enterprises then." If this story resonates with you, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. The McKinley meeting was simultaneously the longest and shortest 90 minutes of Bryce Harrington's life. He sat in silence as Thomas Jensen, now every inch the charismatic CEO described in business magazines, led the potential clients through a masterful presentation of Jensen Enterprises' marketing capabilities. To Bryce's surprise, Jensen used the very slides and talking points Bryce had prepared, though he delivered them with a warmth and authenticity Bryce knew he could never match. The McKinley executives were clearly impressed. What had been pitched as an exploratory meeting ended with handshakes and promises of contracts to be signed by the end of the week. Throughout it all, Jensen never once acknowledged the earlier confrontation or indicated to the clients that anything was amiss. As the McKinley team filed out, escorted by Charlotte Hayes and several account executives, Jensen turned to Bryce. "My office. 20 minutes. Then he was gone, swept into a conversation with the McKinley CEO about their mutual love of deep-sea fishing. Bryce returned to his office in a daze. The marketing department had fallen unusually quiet, with employees speaking in hushed tones and throwing furtive glances his way. News of his confrontation with the CEO had clearly spread like wildfire. Megan sat at her desk outside his office, studiously focused on her computer screen, though her rapid blinking suggested she was fighting back tears. "Megan," Bryce said softly, "could you come in for a moment?" She followed him into his office, standing awkwardly just inside the door, as if preparing for a quick escape. "I owe you an apology," Bryce began, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. "The way I spoke to you this morning about the reports was unacceptable. You were doing your job, following up with the data team as best you could. I was wrong to take my stress out on you." Megan's eyes widened in surprise. "It's okay, Mr. Harrington. I understand the presentation was important." "It's not okay," Bryce insisted, surprising himself with his vehemence. "And it's not the first time I've been unnecessarily harsh. I haven't been the kind of manager you deserve." A heavy silence filled the room as Megan seemed to struggle with how to respond to this unexpected vulnerability from her notoriously demanding boss. "Is this because of what happened with Mr. Jensen?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Bryce considered denying it, claiming this change of heart was entirely his own initiative, but he was tired of the facades and pretenses that had defined his professional life. "Partly," he admitted. "It was a wake-up call. But that doesn't make the apology any less sincere." Megan nodded slowly. "I appreciate that, Mr. Harrington. And for what it's worth, I hope things work out with Mr. Jensen. Despite everything, you're brilliant at what you do." The simple kindness in the face of his previous behavior made Bryce's throat tighten unexpectedly. "Thank you, Megan. That means a lot." After she left, Bryce sat alone in his office, staring at the marketing awards and framed achievements that lined his walls. Accomplishments that had seemed so important this morning now felt hollow. He'd built his career on results, believing that outcomes justified methods. But what had those methods cost him? The respect of his team, the trust of his colleagues, and now, possibly, his job itself. At precisely 20 minutes after the McKinley meeting concluded, Bryce stepped off the elevator onto the 49th floor. Executive territory he had visited only for company-wide meetings and special presentations. A receptionist directed him to Thomas Jensen's corner office, her expression giving away nothing about what awaited him inside. Jensen's official office was surprisingly modest given his stature, spacious but not ostentatious, with bookshelves lining one wall and large windows offering panoramic views of the Chicago skyline. Jensen himself sat behind a desk, made from reclaimed wood, reading glasses perched on the end of his nose as he reviewed some document. "Come in, Bryce," he said without looking up. "Close the door behind you." Bryce did as instructed and took a seat in one of the chairs facing the desk. Jensen continued reading for another minute, a power move Bryce himself had employed countless times to make subordinates squirm. The difference was that Jensen seemed genuinely absorbed in the document rather than performing disinterest for effect. Finally, Jensen removed his glasses and looked up. The McKinley presentation went well. They were particularly impressed with the market segmentation analysis your team developed. "Thank you, sir," Bryce replied, uncertain where this was heading. "My team did exceptional work on that component." "My team," Jensen repeated. "Interesting choice of words. Do you consider them your team, or are they your employees?" Bryce hesitated, sensing a trap. "They're my team members. We work together toward common goals. Yet you lead through intimidation rather than inspiration. That doesn't sound like teamwork to me. Mr. Jensen, I acknowledge that my management style can be intense, but the marketing department has delivered record results under my leadership. Our campaigns have driven a 27% increase in qualified leads and a 43% improvement in conversion rates over the past year." Jensen nodded slowly. "I'm well aware of your department's metrics. They're impressive. What's less impressive is your department's 42% annual turnover rate, the highest in the company by a significant margin." Bryce had no response to that. He'd always considered employee turnover an acceptable cost of high performance. "Do you know what I look for in leaders at Jensen Enterprises?" Jensen continued. "Not just results, but how those results are achieved. The means matter as much as the ends." He stood up and walked to the window, gazing out at the city below. "When I started this company, I made a promise to myself. We would never become one of those soulless corporations where people are treated as disposable resources, where leaders like you believe that berating employees, fostering fear, and dismissing basic human dignity are acceptable management techniques." Jensen turned back to face Bryce. "Your behavior this morning wasn't an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a leadership philosophy fundamentally incompatible with the culture I've built here." This was it, Bryce realized. He was being fired. 6 years of 60-hour weeks, sacrificed weekends, and relentless drive, all ending because he'd insulted a CEO disguised as a janitor. "I understand, sir," Bryce said, his voice steady despite the turmoil he felt. "I'll clear out my office immediately." Jensen raised an eyebrow. "I haven't asked for your resignation, Bryce." "You haven't?" "No. Contrary to the example you set this morning, I don't believe in firing people without giving them a chance to grow." Jensen returned to his desk and sat down. "I'm placing you on a 3-month performance improvement plan. Not for your marketing results, those are exemplary, but for your leadership approach." Bryce blinked in surprise. "A performance improvement plan for how I treat people?" "Exactly. You'll work directly with our executive coach, Dr. Martinez, meeting weekly to develop more effective leadership skills. You'll also participate in our frontline employee experience program. 2 weeks working in customer service, experiencing the impact of the marketing campaigns you create from the perspective of those who have to implement them. Jensen slid a folder across the desk. Your marketing responsibilities will be temporarily reduced, with Charlotte overseeing major client presentations until Dr. Martinez certifies that you've made sufficient progress. Bryce took the folder with numb fingers. Part of him wanted to protest, to defend his record, to negotiate better terms, to maintain the facade of confidence that had carried him this far. But a larger part recognized the extraordinary second chance he was being offered. "Thank you, Mr. Jensen," he said quietly. "This is more generous than I deserve." "Perhaps," Jensen agreed. "But I didn't build this company by discarding talented people. You have exceptional skills, Bryce. What you lack is wisdom about how to use them without leaving a trail of damaged colleagues in your wake." He leaned forward, his expression serious but not unkind. "Consider this your inflection point, the moment that determines whether you become the leader you're capable of being or remain the bully you've allowed yourself to become." The words stung with their accuracy. Bryce had never thought of himself as a bully. Demanding, yes, exacting, certainly, but always in service to excellence. Yet the evidence was hard to deny. The fearful glances from his team, Megan's tears, the sky-high turnover rate, and his own instant impulse to demean someone he perceived as beneath him. "I'll make the most of this opportunity," Bryce promised, surprising himself with his sincerity. "You won't regret giving me this chance." Jensen studied him for a long moment. "That remains to be seen, but I hope you're right." He gestured toward the door. "You'll start with Dr. Martinez tomorrow morning. Today, I suggest you spend some time reflecting on how you want to be remembered by the people you work with, not just for what you accomplished, but for how you treated them along the way." As Bryce rode the elevator back to the marketing department, the performance improvement plan folder heavy in his hands, he felt strangely liberated. For years, he'd measured his worth by his title, his salary, and his record of achievements. Now, facing the potential loss of everything he'd worked for, he recognized the hollowness of that measurement. The marketing department fell silent as he walked through, all eyes following his progress to his office. They were waiting for news of his firing, he realized, perhaps even hoping for it. The thought was humbling in a way no professional setback had ever been. Bryce closed his office door and sat at his desk, opening the folder Jensen had given him. Inside was the formal performance plan, but paper-clipped to the front was a handwritten note. "The true measure of a person isn't how they treat their equals or superiors, but how they treat those they perceive as beneath them. Today, you failed that measure, but tomorrow is another chance to do better. TJ." Bryce read the note 3 times, then carefully tucked it into his wallet. Whatever came next, whether he salvaged his career at Jensen Enterprises or had to rebuild elsewhere, he would keep those words with him as a reminder of the leader he wanted to become. 3 months after his confrontation with CEO Thomas Jensen, Bryce Harrington stood in the elevator of Jensen Enterprises' Chicago headquarters, watching the floor numbers climb. But unlike that fateful day in September, he wasn't headed to the 49th floor for a reckoning. Today, he was going to the basement, specifically to the maintenance department where the janitorial staff began their shifts. The elevator doors opened to reveal a utilitarian space with concrete floors, fluorescent lighting, and walls lined with industrial shelving holding cleaning supplies. About a dozen people in the familiar blue uniforms were gathered around a folding table, enjoying coffee and donuts before dispersing throughout the building to begin their workday. Frank Delgado, the head of facilities maintenance, noticed Bryce first. "Mr. Harrington, right on time. Everyone, this is the VP of Marketing I told you about." 12 pairs of eyes turned toward Bryce, expressions ranging from curious to wary. These were people he had worked in the same building with for years, but had never truly seen. The invisible workforce that kept Jensen Enterprises functioning while executives like him claimed the spotlight. "Good morning," Bryce greeted them, suddenly self-conscious, in his casual attire of jeans and a company polo shirt. "Thank you for allowing me to join you today. Mr. Harrington is shadowing different departments as part of a new executive development program," Frank explained to his team, diplomatically omitting that this was actually part of Bryce's performance improvement plan. "He'll be with us for the next 3 days, learning what we do and how we contribute to the company. Maria, he'll start with you today." A middle-aged woman with kind eyes and grey-streaked hair nodded. "Of course, you can help me with the executive floor." There was a ripple of knowing laughter among the group, and Bryce felt his face flush. The story of his encounter with Tom the janitor had clearly made the rounds throughout the company, including to the actual janitorial staff. As the meeting broke up and staff headed to their assigned areas, Maria handed Bryce a blue uniform jacket. "This will help you blend in. Not that anyone notices us anyway." The simple statement hit Bryce with unexpected force. In his 3 months of working with executive coach Dr. Martinez, he'd been confronted repeatedly with his blind spots and biases, but nothing had prepared him for the raw experience of becoming invisible in a building where he once commanded attention. Maria showed him how to stock the cleaning cart and explained their morning route. "We start at the top and work our way down. Executive floor first, since they arrive later, but expect everything to be perfect." As they rode the service elevator to the 49th floor, Bryce asked, "How long have you worked at Jensen Enterprises?" 12 years this March," Maria replied. "I started when we were still in the old building on Michigan Avenue, before Mr. Jensen moved us here." "Under 12 years," Bryce echoed, humbled by the realization that Maria had been keeping the company running smoothly since before he'd even graduated from college. "You must have seen a lot of changes." Maria nodded. 5 office moves, 3 logo redesigns, and too many executives to count." She gave him a knowing look. "Some nicer than others." The executive floor was quiet at 7 a.m. with only a few early risers already at their desks. Maria showed Bryce how to efficiently empty trash bins, clean surfaces and vacuum without disturbing those working. Most executives didn't acknowledge their presence, though a few offered distracted good mornings without looking up from their computers. "Don't take it personally," Maria advised as they moved from office to office. "Most of them don't mean to be rude, they just don't really see us." "I was one of them," Bryce admitted. "I probably walked past you 100 times without noticing." 1,000 more likely, Maria corrected with a small smile. "But Mr. Jensen always notices. Even before that incident with you, he would stop and chat when he saw me. Ask about my granddaughter's dance recitals. Remember my husband's health issues. Little things that make a difference." They had reached Thomas Jensen's office, and Maria knocked softly before entering. The office was empty, but evidence of an early start was visible. A half-empty coffee mug, an open laptop, notes scribbled on a legal pad. "Mr. Jensen is usually here by 6:30, Maria explained as she emptied his recycling bin. "But he has breakfast with the engineering team every Monday, so we have a few minutes." Bryce looked around the office, seeing it through new eyes. The bookshelves contained an eclectic mix of business texts, science fiction novels, and historical biographies. Family photos lined one credenza, Jensen, with what appeared to be his children and grandchildren. On the wall hung framed mementos of company milestones, but also children's artwork, presumably from the younger faces in the photos. "He keeps it real," Maria commented, noticing Bryce's attention to the personal touches. "Not like some executives with their sterile showcases. This is a working office for a man who hasn't forgotten where he came from." And as they finished and prepared to move to the next floor, Bryce found himself deeply affected by this glimpse into Jensen's authentic self. The CEO's office revealed a man defined not just by business accomplishments, but by relationships, intellectual curiosity, and family bonds, dimensions entirely absent from Bryce's own workspace, which functioned more as a trophy case than a reflection of his humanity. The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity as Bryce followed Maria through the building, cleaning bathrooms, wiping down surfaces in common areas, and collecting trash from seemingly endless bins. By noon, his back ached. His hands were raw despite the gloves Maria had insisted he wear, and he had developed a new appreciation for the physical demands of a job he had previously considered unskilled labor. During their lunch break in the maintenance department break room, Bryce sat with Maria and several other members of the cleaning staff. The conversation flowed easily among them. Discussions of family events, community news, and good-natured teasing about a recent staff bowling night. "So, Mr. Marketing VP," said Eduardo, an older gentleman who maintained the exterior grounds, "what have you learned so far about how the other half lives?" Bryce considered the question carefully. "That the building doesn't run itself, that there's an entire operation happening around us executives that we take completely for granted, and that I've been living in a bubble." Eduardo nodded approvingly. "Not bad for half a day's work." "Can I ask you all something?" Bryce ventured. When they nodded, he continued, "That day with Mr. Jensen, has he done that often? The janitor disguise." The table erupted in laughter. "At least once a month for years," Frank confirmed. "He borrows a uniform from our supply room and just blends in. Most executives never notice him, but the regular employees figured it out pretty quick. It's kind of an open secret on the lower floors." "He's good people," added Maria. "My husband had a heart attack 3 years ago, and Mr. Jensen made sure our health insurance covered everything. When I thanked him, he just said, 'We take care of our own at Jensen Enterprises.' And he meant it." As the break ended and they returned to work, Bryce found himself increasingly immersed in the experience, rather than just going through the motions of his assignment. By the time his shift ended at 3 p.m., he had developed genuine respect for Maria and her colleagues, not just for the physical demands of their work, but for the dignity and care with which they performed it. "You did good today, Mr. Harrington," Maria told him as they parted ways. "For a beginner." "Thank you for your patience," Bryce replied sincerely. "I'll see you tomorrow morning." 5:45 sharp, she reminded him with a grin. "And wear comfortable shoes. Tomorrow we're doing the stairwells." Instead of returning to his office on the 48th floor, Bryce found himself drawn to the company's main lobby. He sat on one of the modern benches, watching the late afternoon flow of employees and visitors through the security gates. For the first time, he noticed the security guards greeting regulars by name, the maintenance worker quickly wiping up a coffee spill, the IT support person helping a frustrated visitor with the guest Wi-Fi. An entire ecosystem of support staff made Jensen Enterprises function, yet they remained largely invisible to the executives and managers who claimed credit for the company's success. Bryce had been guilty of this selective blindness, viewing these workers as mere background elements rather than essential contributors to the company's operation. His reflections were interrupted by a tap on his shoulder. He turned to find Thomas Jensen standing beside him, dressed once again in his CEO attire rather than the janitor's uniform from their first encounter. "Mind if I join you?" Jensen asked, settling onto the bench without waiting for a response. "Maria tells me you put in a full day's work." "I'm not sure I'd go that far," Bryce admitted, "but I tried. She's an excellent teacher." Jensen nodded. "She raised 3 children as a single mother before remarrying, put them all through college on a janitor's salary, and never missed a day of work. There's more grit and determination in Maria than in most of the executives on our leadership team." They sat in silence for a moment, watching the lobby traffic. "When I was building this company," Jensen said eventually, "I made plenty of mistakes, hired the wrong people, pursued the wrong opportunities, nearly went bankrupt twice. But the one thing I got right from the beginning was understanding that a company is its people, all its people, not just the ones with impressive titles or corner offices." Bryce absorbed this, comparing it to his own leadership philosophy that had prioritized results above all else. "I'm starting to understand that," he said, "though I still have a long way to go." "That's why I didn't fire you," Jensen replied matter-of-factly. "You're smart enough to learn and young enough to change. The question is whether you want to badly enough. I do, Bryce said, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. These past 3 months working with Dr. Martinez have been eye-opening, and today with Maria was humbling in the best possible way. Jensen studied him for a moment. Your marketing metrics have taken a slight hit since you started the improvement plan. Bryce nodded, having anticipated this observation. My leadership approach was effective in the short term, but unsustainable. I drove results through fear and burnout. Now I'm learning to build processes that can deliver consistent results without crushing the team in the process. And how is your team responding to the new Bryce Harrington? With suspicion at first, Bryce admitted with a rueful smile. They thought it was some elaborate test or trick, but gradually they're starting to trust that the changes are real. Turnover has already decreased, and Megan says that job applications for our department have increased by 30%. Jensen seemed pleased by this report. People talk. Word gets around about which departments respect their employees and which ones chew them up and spit them out. A maintenance worker approached their bench, pushing a floor polisher toward the west wing of the lobby. He nodded respectfully to Jensen. "Evening, Mr. Jensen, Mr. Harrington." "Evening, Raj," Jensen replied warmly. "How's your son doing at Northwestern?" "Made the dean's list again," Raj answered with evident pride. That scholarship from the Jensen Foundation made all the difference. "He earned it," Jensen said. "Keep me posted on his progress." After Raj moved on, Jensen turned back to Bryce. "My father worked in the steel mills of Gary, Indiana for 40 years. Never made more than $40,000 a year, broke his body to put food on our table and send me to college. When I started this company, I promised myself that no employee of mine would ever feel as disposable as the mill made him feel." The personal revelation struck Bryce deeply. His own father was a successful surgeon, his mother a corporate attorney. He had grown up in affluence, attending private schools and taking for granted the opportunities that came his way. The contrast with Jensen's background could hardly have been starker. "I never had to think about any of this," Bryce confessed. "My path was always cushioned." "Which isn't your fault," Jensen pointed out. "We don't choose the circumstances of our birth. But we do choose how we treat people once we have power over them. That's the true test of character." Jensen stood, signaling the end of their conversation. "You have 2 more days with the maintenance team, then next week you move to customer service. Keep your eyes and heart open, Bryce. The lessons are everywhere if you're willing to see them." As Jensen walked away, Bryce remained on the bench, contemplating how profoundly his perspective had shifted in just 3 months. The ambitious, results-at-any-cost executive he had been now seemed like a caricature, one-dimensional and ultimately hollow. The following weeks unfolded as Jensen had outlined, with Bryce rotating through various frontline departments: customer service, reception, the mailroom, even the cafeteria kitchen. In each role, he worked alongside employees he would previously have overlooked, learning their challenges, understanding their contributions, and developing a deeper appreciation for the interconnected nature of the company. His weekly sessions with Dr. Martinez became less about checking boxes on his improvement plan and more about genuine self-reflection and growth. They discussed the embedded biases that had shaped his leadership approach, the insecurities that drove his need to dominate rather than collaborate, and the authentic strengths he could leverage without resorting to intimidation. "You've made remarkable progress, Bryce," Dr. Martinez told him during their final scheduled session, exactly 3 months after his confrontation with Jensen. "Your 360-degree feedback shows significant improvement in how your team and colleagues perceive you." She handed him a report summarizing the anonymous feedback collected from those who worked with him. The contrast with his previous evaluation was striking, where once he had been described as intimidating, harsh, and unapproachable. The new assessment included words like fair, respectful, and even inspiring. "There's still work to do," Dr. Martinez cautioned. "Sustainable change takes time and continued effort, but you've laid a solid foundation for a different kind of leadership." Bryce nodded, taking the report. Thank you for your guidance. This process has been more transformative than I could have imagined. The real test comes now, Dr. Martinez reminded him. When the formal improvement plan ends and you're left to hold yourself accountable, it's easy to slip back into old patterns when the external structure is removed. I understand, Bryce assured her, but I have too much at stake to go backward. Not just my career, but the kind of person I want to be. Later that afternoon, Bryce received an email from Thomas Jensen's assistant requesting his presence in the CEO's office the following morning. Though the message gave no indication of the meeting's purpose, Bryce suspected it was related to the conclusion of his improvement plan. Whether the news would be good or bad remained to be seen. That evening, instead of working late as had once been his habit, Bryce joined a group of Jensen employees for a volunteer event at a local food bank. The team included people from across the company: marketers from his department, engineers from R&D, administrative staff from various floors, and Raj from the maintenance crew. As they packed food boxes together, Bryce found himself engaged in easy conversation with colleagues he would never have interacted with in his previous life. They discussed weekend plans, shared restaurant recommendations, and teased each other about the company's softball league. For the first time since joining Jensen Enterprises, Bryce felt like part of a community rather than a one-man mission to climb the corporate ladder. "You're different now," observed Elena, a graphic designer from his marketing team who had always seemed terrified of him before. "In a good way." "I'm trying to be," Bryce acknowledged. "It's been a wake-up call." "Well, we like this version better," she said simply, before returning to her task of sorting canned goods. The simple validation meant more to Bryce than any of the professional accolades he had accumulated over the years. He had spent his career pursuing achievement and advancement, only to discover that what he truly wanted was something far more basic: to be respected not just for his talents, but for his character. The next morning, Bryce arrived at Thomas Jensen's office precisely on time, dressed in his usual business attire, but feeling fundamentally different from the man who had sat in the same chair 3 months earlier. Jensen greeted him warmly, offering coffee before they began their conversation. "Your formal improvement plan period ends today," he said, getting straight to the point. "Dr. Martinez has submitted her final evaluation, which I've reviewed along with feedback from your team and the various departments you've worked with during this time." Bryce waited, trying not to betray his anxiety about what would come next. "The consensus is clear," Jensen continued. "You've demonstrated significant growth in your leadership approach and interpersonal interactions. Charlotte reports that your marketing team's morale has improved dramatically, and while some performance metrics dipped initially, they're now trending upward again as the team stabilizes under your new management style." Relief washed over Bryce. "Thank you, Mr. Jensen. I've taken this process very seriously." "I can see that," Jensen acknowledged. "Which brings us to the question of next steps. Your full responsibilities as VP of Marketing will be reinstated effective immediately. However, I have another proposition for you to consider as well." Jensen slid a folder across the desk, similar to the one that had contained Bryce's improvement plan 3 months ago, but with different contents. "We're creating a new position, Chief People Officer, to elevate human resources to the executive leadership team. The role will oversee not just traditional HR functions, but also corporate culture initiatives, employee experience, and leadership development across the organization." Bryce opened the folder to find a job description for this new C-suite position. "Are you offering this to me?" he asked, confused. His background was in marketing, not human resources. Jensen smiled slightly. "Not exactly. I'm offering you the opportunity to be part of the selection committee for this role. Your recent journey gives you a unique perspective on the kind of leadership we need to foster at Jensen Enterprises. And down the line, if this experience has sparked a genuine interest in human-centered leadership, We can discuss whether your career might evolve in that direction." The offer was unexpected but thoughtful, a chance to continue his growth while contributing to the company in a meaningful way. It acknowledged both how far he had come and how much further he could still go. "I'd be honored to serve on the selection committee," Bryce said sincerely. "Thank you for trusting me with this responsibility." "You've earned it," Jensen replied, "but more importantly, you've earned back the respect of your colleagues. That's the true accomplishment here." As their meeting concluded and Bryce prepared to leave, Jensen asked one final question. "What would you say was the most important lesson from these past 3 months?" Bryce considered carefully before answering. "That leadership isn't about what you can extract from people, their time, their talent, their energy. It's about what you can give them: dignity, purpose, growth. I had it backwards before." Jensen nodded approvingly. "That's a lesson some executives never learn, even after decades in business. The fact that you've grasped it in 3 months gives me great hope for your future, Bryce." The following Monday, Bryce arrived at work early, as had become his habit. But instead of immediately heading to his office, he stopped by the basement to join the maintenance team for their morning coffee. Maria smiled in surprise as he entered. "Mr. Harrington, we didn't expect to see you again now that your assignment is over. Please call me Bryce," he insisted, accepting the coffee Frank offered him. "And I wanted to stop by to thank you all properly. The time I spent with your team changed my perspective in ways I'm still discovering." "Just doing our jobs," Eduardo said with a shrug, though his expression suggested he appreciated the acknowledgement. "That's just it," Bryce replied. "You do your jobs with pride and care, even when most of the company doesn't notice. It taught me something about what real professionalism looks like." After sharing coffee and conversation for a few minutes, Bryce bid them goodbye and headed to the marketing department. As he walked through the open workspace, he greeted team members by name, asking about their weekends and family updates he had learned to track during his transformation. The fear that had once permeated the department had been replaced by an atmosphere of engaged collaboration. People still worked hard. Jensen Enterprises remained a high-performance environment, but they did so from a place of commitment rather than coercion. In his office, Bryce found a small package on his desk with a note from Megan. Inside was a framed quotation that read, "A leader is best when people barely know he exists. When his work is done, his aim fulfilled, they will say, 'We did it ourselves.'" Lao Tzu. Touched by the gesture, Bryce placed the frame prominently on his desk, a daily reminder of the leader he was striving to become. Then he opened his laptop and began composing an email to his team, outlining a new collaborative approach to the upcoming quarter's marketing strategy, one that would incorporate input from all levels of the department rather than being dictated from the top down. As he typed, Bryce reflected on the strange journey that had brought him to this point. 3 months ago, he had insulted a janitor who turned out to be the CEO, setting in motion a process of personal and professional transformation he could never have anticipated. What had initially felt like the most humiliating moment of his career had ultimately become its saving grace. His computer pinged with a calendar notification for the first meeting of the Chief People Officer Selection Committee, scheduled for later that week. The future that stretched before him now was different from the one he had envisioned before, richer, more nuanced, and infinitely more meaningful. Outside his office window, the Chicago skyline gleamed in the morning sun, much as it had on that fateful day when his world had turned upside down. But Bryce Harrington was no longer the same man who had walked into Jensen Enterprises that morning, secure in his superiority and blind to the humanity around him. He had been broken down and rebuilt, not through punishment, but through the rarest of second chances, the opportunity to see himself clearly and choose a better path forward. A knock on his doorframe interrupted his reflections. He looked up to see a young intern from the creative team, clutching a portfolio and looking nervous. "Mr. Harrington, I'm sorry to disturb you, but I was hoping to get your feedback on these campaign concepts before the team meeting." 3 months ago, Bryce would have dismissed the interruption, perhaps with a cutting remark about proper channels and scheduled appointments. Today, he smiled and gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Come in," he said warmly. "And please call me Bryce. I'd be happy to look at your ideas." The intern's relief was visible as she took a seat and began spreading her work across Bryce's desk. As they discussed the campaign concepts, Bryce found himself genuinely engaged, not just in the marketing strategy, but in mentoring a young professional at the beginning of her career, offering the guidance and respect he wished he had prioritized sooner. Later that day, as Bryce walked through the lobby on his way to lunch, he spotted a janitor cleaning the glass doors at the entrance. For a moment, he wondered if it might be Thomas Jensen on another undercover mission. But as he drew closer, he recognized Raj, working diligently to remove fingerprints from the gleaming surface. "Afternoon, Raj," Bryce greeted him. "Those doors are looking spotless." Raj looked up in surprise, clearly not accustomed to executives noticing his work. "Thank you, Mr. Harrington, just doing my job, and doing it exceptionally well," Bryce added sincerely. "How's your son doing at Northwestern?" The smile that spread across Raj's face at the mention of his son was worth more than any marketing award Bryce had ever received. As they chatted briefly about the young man's academic accomplishments, Bryce realized that these small moments of genuine human connection, was the true currency of leadership. Not power, not prestige, not even professional achievement, but the simple, profound dignity of seeing people, truly seeing them, and acknowledging their value. As Bryce continued toward the exit, he passed Thomas Jensen entering the building. Their eyes met, and Jensen gave him a small nod of approval, acknowledgement of how far Bryce had come from the man who had once deemed a janitor beneath his notice. Bryce returned the nod with genuine respect, grateful for the painful but necessary lesson that had changed the course of his life. In trying to climb the corporate ladder, he had been ascending in the wrong direction all along. True leadership, he now understood, wasn't about rising above others, but about lifting them up alongside you. Outside, the bustling streets of Chicago continued their eternal rhythm, people hurrying to meetings, tourists admiring the architecture, construction workers repairing sidewalks. Each person with their own story, their own dignity, their own essential contribution to the tapestry of the city. Bryce Harrington walked among them with new eyes, eyes that had been opened by the disguised CEO who had seen potential in him even at his worst moment. The lesson had been harsh, but necessary, the transformation challenging, but rewarding. And though his journey was far from complete, he moved forward with a clear understanding of the leader and the person he wanted to be. If this story taught you something valuable about leadership and the true measure of a person, please share it with others who might benefit from its message. Like this video, subscribe to our channel, and join us next week for another true story about the unexpected ways our words and actions can change lives, including our own. Thank you for watching.